Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, our second webinar on responsible dissemination. My name is Sean Lacey. I'm the Research Integrity and Compliance Officer for the university. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Sinéad Hanrahan, our Digital Scholarship Librarian, who's going to speak to us on Start As You Mean to Go On, including authorship agreements in your research plan. Now, just before I hand over to Sinéad, I just want to flag, I suppose, 2 points from our authorship policy that we have in relation to, I suppose, the importance of having these authorship agreements and how essentially an authorship agreement is something that should be looked at and discussed at this early stage of a career, of a research, I suppose, journey that you may be on. And this is irrespective of whether you're a student conducting research or a staff member conducting research. The idea of authorship and having a discussion around that should be discussed early on. And then how I suppose the points that might have been covered in that meeting that you would have had or the decisions made should be noted and then should be adhered to. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't be changed later on, but that there should be documented, or I suppose a record of the decisions made. When I think of that, then I suppose that is ultimately one of the reasons like why we've been facilitating these webinars on responsible dissemination, whereby we're looking at, I suppose it's our responsibility within the university to be promoting these good research practices as well and providing information on how to comply with these as well. So when you look at the various webinars that we facilitated so far, and we look at identifying predatory journals, which was in November of 23. Good authorship practices, there's a webinar on that in November 23. Only last week, so in March 24, we had a webinar on giving credit where it is due, a guide to using the contributor roles taxonomy. And in today's webinar, we're looking at authorship agreements. So I'm delighted to hand over to Sinead, who's going to speak to us on Start As You Mean to Go On, including authorship agreements in your research plan. Over to you, Sinead.
Thanks very much, Sean. I'll just share my screen. And there we are. Now, thanks again, Sean. Today I am going to, I suppose, follow on, as Sean showed there, from what we were talking about last week, which was the credit taxonomy, and this further builds on what we have been doing over the last few months in terms of responsible practices when it comes to dissemination. So just to recap the things that we've covered, so we've covered the standards for authorship within research integrity. We have looked at international, national and local policies and how they inform what we do here in MTU. We spoke last week about the 4 criteria that you meet for authorship standards. We explored the credit taxonomy and how to utilize it last week. And we explored how we can utilize ORCID and our ORCID account to express the credit taxonomy in the work that we do. So today, what we will look at is how you actually plan for authorship and how you do it in a way that upholds best practice for research integrity, upholds the policies that are related to authorship publication, but also policies that might be related specifically to your area of our discipline. So just broadly, what are the basics of an authorship agreement? Okay, so you do it at the start of a project. There's no point doing it later on. Although if you're in the middle of a project, the best time to start is right now. Who is involved in it? The full project team. Anyone who has any role on the project should be accounted for in this document. Why? It ensures best practice, essentially. This is very useful for your reporting. It's very useful if you're doing this at the very start. Like we recommend, it's very useful if you're going for other sort of planning or proposal parts of research. So if you're going for further funding, if you're going for ethics, if you're doing a research data management plan, all of these things are hugely important. If you've been involved in any kind of Horizon 2020 project, you will know that there's an enormous amount of reporting in it. This is a very valuable document to have for that type of reporting. The way you do it is to have a living document. It continues throughout the entire project with you. Projects change, things that you planned for maybe don't work out and you have to find alternatives. So you adapt, you express that through this document when you go through. And most importantly, in terms of things to really keep in mind is that you create an authorship agreement for every individual output. You don't put everything into the one place, because the outputs that you could have for a project could be for a wide breadth of platforms or even audiences. So you could have your traditional peer-reviewed research, you could have maybe a conference presentation, you might have a book, but you might also have blog posts, newspaper articles, tweets. All of those expressions or sharing or dissemination of your work has to be and should really be planned for, because there's a lot of considerations that go into it, particularly if you have specific funding and things like that. Like you have to be able to account for everything you've done. So to give you an idea of what should be included, I've broken it down into 5 separate sections. So the first section is terms. So what are the terms of the agreement that you are all coming together on first? So first of all, I would provide an outline of the document purpose, and I'm going to show you an example now in a minute. I would then define what authorship is and under which terms you are agreeing to this. So are you using the ICJME terms? Are you using COPE? Are you using maybe local terms that are in maybe an authorship policy that you have? I would include all of that in your terms. So I'm just going to, hopefully this will work now. I'm just hoping this document pops up and shares itself. Yes. So here's an example of an agreement that does what I just outlined. So they're establishing right here that what the document is, that it will be a living document, and it's what its purpose is. You would provide maybe the title or a working title for your manuscript here. If it is a manuscript, it might be, it might be a blog post or whatever. Your working title is what goes here. And now they've outlined the context. They've the ICMJ, that this is what what this basically states is these are the terms that we are agreeing to this, and when you sign, this is what you're signing for. This is really important. If there's any other related information that should be added here, I would encourage you to add it all. I would add COPE guidelines here. I would add any policy guidelines that are related to your institution or any other stakeholders that are involved. It's really, really important to have those in the document. So that's section 1, okay? Section 2. Yeah. Section 2 is then we're talking about the project itself. So you put in your project name, the brief description of it, as you move on, you might end up developing an abstract for that. But again, living document, we go with it as we are. You put in all the project team members and the roles they're playing in the project, and then you provide in the information that you have in terms of funding. So this is very important, particularly more so for people actually other than yourselves. So for the likes of myself, who's a librarian and works in the research area, and I have to do the job of reporting or making sure that reporting is included in how I share research. Oftentimes I find that the funding isn't expressed properly. People don't provide the right information. So having all of that information to hand in a document is really useful. What generally is needed is you need to know who the funder is. You need to know the project name, particularly if it has an acronym. We want the full name and the acronym. We want the funding program. So for example, if you were getting Horizon 2020 funding, right? Your funder is the European Commission. The program is Horizon 2020. Then you will be given a number, and then there might be a particular strand or whatever, and that will be the name and the acronym. We need all of that information to do our side of the job, which is to ensure that Horizon Europe and the European Union can see that you have done your job on reporting on it properly, essentially. So all of that information is really important. We'll just get another document to give you an idea. Here's another example of a document, and something to keep in mind with these documents is there isn't really a set standard with them. So I've taken parts of a lot that I have found and put them into a structure that I think is most useful and most expressive of the most vital information that is needed in these documents. So this is one from the University of Charlotte. And what they're looking for now here in terms of is like the project description, the type of publication, if there's any extra authorship guidelines. So as you can see, you might have COPE and the ICMJ, but also in psychology, there's specific guidelines that are required here, and you have to include those too. And you add in the roles and the funding, and away you go. So 3, output details, right? So this is the part that's going to change for every output. So let's say it's a research article. Okay, so we're going to put it down as a research article. Potential publications. This is useful for the following section, where you're going to put down your intended journals. Okay, so this is demonstrating that you have thought about your publication and where might be the best fit for it, and ideally you will have a list of it. What to keep in mind in here is that depending on the publication that you go for, you might have other responsibilities that you need to outline. If the publication, for example, requires that your data is made openly available, that you have proof of ethics. They might want other details like, they might not demand, but they might require that you have an ORCID ID. All these things that you might have to make it, you might have to publish in an open journal. These are all things you need to know very early at the stage of the project, because let's say you want to put it in an open journal, you have to ensure that that's a journal that you can have funding to publish in, that you have the time to publish in it. Then the data, if you like, data isn't something that you can manage after the fact. It's something you have to plan for the management for. So when you do start your data management plan, you should be doing that at the same time that you're starting this authorship plan, so that you can be thinking about maybe any other criteria that you might need to include for your data in order to get the publication that you want. So that's why we say to do this so early, because there's your research interacts with each other. The different stages of your research actually interacts with each other more than you think it does. So we put those there. So that's the other specific requirements of it. And then your submission date. So that, again, it's a living document. So you'll put down maybe a proposed submission date, and then that can shift into a concrete, this is the day we submitted. And then you can put in a concrete publication date when you get that information. Contributions. So last week we spoke about the credit taxonomy and the importance of tracking the contributions that everyone in the research group has made to the work, because as we established, there is a high threshold to be met to be called a author in academic publishing. So the credit taxonomy provides an opportunity and really clarity of that in your research project. So I would add that table in, and if you go back to the previous set of slides, you will see those tables. So it's basically standard table on the left hand side. You would put down your 14 contributions that are under the credit taxonomy, and across the top you would put in then your number of contributors. And at the end of the project, when you are at the submission stage of an output, you would look at the contributions made by those people, and based on that you would then determine who were authors on the piece that you were submitting. And you would and obviously we're doing this for each individual output, so we do this on each individual author agreement as well. And then when you're at that point as well, when you've established who was an author and who isn't, then you would establish the author order. And trends differ in different disciplines. So in the sciences, the first author tends to be, say, the one who's done the most work, or if you're a PhD student, that tends to be the student, and the supervisor tends to be the last person. So it's different in different places, so be aware of that when you're doing it, and communicate that within a group as well. If there are any specific trends that need to be called out, I would actually put them in section 1 as something that we need to be aware of and are agreeing to very early on. And then we're signing it. So everyone on the team, name printed and signed, dated. Then I would leave a space for any changes. So that might be maybe somebody, things happen, projects go on for a long while. Maybe somebody drops out of the team, or equally somebody joins the team. We want to create space and acknowledge that this is a moving target really when it comes to this, and we want to express everything that happens in the project over the course of its lifetime. What are the advantages of doing all of this work? Well, it's a very solid guide for your research. When you get to a reporting stage, or even at the stage where maybe you are presenting on it or doing an update or whatever, it's really, really useful to have documentation that has been kept up to date along every stage of it. Again, doing a research ethics application, data management, a proposal, having this type of information is going to save you a huge amount of time, because you will have already done the work. You will just be applying it to a different format. And that's away you go. It's very, very effective. It's best practice. Again, it's for reporting. It upholds research integrity, and that should be reason enough. But another reason is it avoids and helps resolve conflict, because if you were all agreeing to this, you were all signing it, then it would take a lot for a disagreement to emerge out of that, if everyone who's involved and is in contention for authorship has agreed to this document. So that's it. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take it. And as always, if you have any questions along the way of your research process, get in contact with me and I'd be happy to help.
Perfect. Thanks very much for that, Sinead. That was very useful, and I really liked the way you kind of moved between the points that you're making and just even kind of your own live document. And essentially, I suppose what seemed to be to me is it was quite straightforward. Like there wasn't a whole lot to this, which I think in relation to, I suppose, it's not a 10-page document that we're looking at here when it comes to this kind of authorship agreement. So look, we're happy to take any questions. So if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question or pop a question into the chat, there's we can read it out. There's no problem like that. No questions yet in the chat. So what I'll do is I just have one or two here actually. Well, I suppose one thing that definitely, I suppose, kind of, and I suppose I've already said something jumps out at me. So this is the second thing that now that jumps out at me is just how, when we talk about good research practice and when we talk about kind of research integrity, how a lot of it is based on having plans in place. When I think of various webinars that we've facilitated, you and I, Sinead, or with other colleagues, it was about having discussions earlier on, having plans early on. When you think of research, you mentioned research ethics, so that's you have your research ethics application form early on, but then that obviously sets the bar to what you're going to be doing ethically throughout your research journey. You talk about research data management plans, so they're obviously something that you try to do early on in your research journey. Statistical analysis planning, if for anyone that may be looking at kind of doing some quantitative analysis, having a statistical analysis plan is something that you'd have in place at the start. And now authorship agreements, and that's just a couple. There are other ones there, and I think what was very helpful here for these is that this just gives absolute transparency among the research team to look, where are we going here? Is it with our data management, with our statistical analysis, and with our authorship? And Sinead touched on it in the last slide there. It can avoid or maybe resolve but conflict. And nobody wants to be involved in conflict. So if there's anything that we can do that maybe can help mitigate against that, I would think it's very much welcome. And when I think of all the various plans that I mentioned there, when I talk about ethics application forms, statistical analysis plan, research data management plan, the authorship agreement actually seems to be one of the most, I suppose, I won't say taxing, but there's not a whole lot to this. And it's basically having it something that's just nice, clear and transparent. Okay, so that was maybe me more doing a bit of a rambling, I suppose, of how you've sold me on it. But I suppose what was interesting there is it's not just all about publications. And I thought that was, you said that at the very start. It's about nearly having this kind of awareness and kind of communication around any type of dissemination, whether it is kind of posts on X or maybe something that you might do at a conference. I thought that was very interesting, Sinead. Do you want to kind of elaborate on that maybe?
Yeah, actually, interestingly, I did a class this morning on communication through your PhD, and an awful lot of what we're talking about today came up in that. And what I spoke about in that is when we talk about making plans, and the reason we go on so much about plans is because the plan gives you an opportunity to think out loud about your research and to demonstrate your research thinking. And that's something that is hugely important when we're communicating our research. So, for example, for what you just spoke about there, we do tend to kind of get bogged down in the idea of we're just about peer-reviewed articles and stuff like that. But an awful lot of the research that we engage in has really interested, valued stakeholders who want to understand the work as well. Maybe they're people that you collected the data off, maybe they're people that are directly related to the work that you're doing, and you need to be able to collaborate with them, or not collaborate, but communicate with them as much as you do with your peers via an article. So thinking about that and not ahead of time and planning for it means, I think, you get a much more nuanced and considered approach and a much more better opportunity to actually be effective in that communication. So, but if you're just throwing a tweet out where you're just linking to the article, there's so many, most people aren't going to be able to engage with that for a whole host of reasons, whether it's they don't have the academic understanding of it, maybe they don't have the access to the article because the article is behind a paywall. There's loads of different reasons. So, in trying to reach your audiences, you have to be thinking about the different modes that are available to you to do that. You could end up, there could be a video. There's loads of different things you can do. So I'm a firm believer of getting the thoughts down, getting the thought process down and refining over and over and over as you go through the research process, because I just feel you are a more competent researcher and you're more competent at communicating your research. And I think then that enhances the trustworthiness that people have with you. If you can sit down and talk about your research at a drop of a hat and already have thought about it so much that you can refine it and transform it into a context that somebody who isn't from your area can understand, that to me is just a sign of a really class researcher that knows what they're doing. And it's it's just worth putting in that extra effort. It pays off later on and actually makes your work less stressful, I think, later on when you've put in all that work at the start.
And it comes across when you are actually communicating
Yeah.
or talking about your research. That preparation actually it is very evident in just in how confident you would be speaking about your research. Another thing that actually, and there's no question yet in the chat there, but I'm very much welcome any questions. But another one that jumped out at me there was just when you were saying about the journals, when you were saying, look, maybe put down what journals you're targeting and look,
Yeah.
what are the requirements of those journals? And I thought that was good because it was a reminder for myself, like you mentioned, oh, about ORCID, about data management, and also just about journals, like what's their policy around preprints? Are you allowed to maybe have something as a preprint? And preprint is something that Sinead has spoken about previous, but also we would have had Dr. Michiel de Boer on our Fostering Research Integrity speaker series speaking about the idea of preprints. But it's very good when we're looking at narrowing down what journal we're trying to target, even at an early stage. Look, what is their thought process around preprints, around ORCIDs, around data management, around ethics, and everything like that? Is there anything you might like to add to that, Sinead?
Yeah, absolutely. A preprint is something that I think people are maybe a little bit afraid of. They maybe don't understand completely. So just to, I suppose, clarify for here, a preprint is the version of your maybe the version of your paper that you submit to a journal. A lot of people are fearful of it because they think it would maybe disqualify them from publishing with that journal, but most publishers don't view a preprint as a publication because it hasn't gone through peer review yet. And then other people worry about it that people might steal their ideas, or pip them to the post is one of the terms used. But it's actually a much safer approach, because your ideas, your work is time stamped. So if somebody does come along and share something, you might actually be more entitled to a citation than the idea that someone has beaten you to it, that, you know, that, look, this is the nature of research, your work is there, and you have evidence and proof of it. That's really important, because it's very hard to prove if you don't do it. The other side of it as well, and I suppose going back to the idea of communicating your research, is that it is an opportunity for you to communicate your research at a very early stage, to potentially get feedback from peers that may be beneficial to this paper, to this version. Like, you might post a preprint and not submit to a journal straight away. You might want some of that community feedback to kind of see, does anyone notice? Is there anything wrong here? And this is a very good practice to get into. Ourselves, Sean, anytime we do any kind of work together, we always do that. Here, will you have a look over that first before we take it live? That's a very good practice to have in any work that you do, whether it's training like we're doing now, or academic writing and dissemination. It's good to get into the practice of doing it, of communicating in a way where you're trying to ensure you're understood, that when you're trying to ensure that your methodology is right, is being checked. But it develops your own skills then in actually taking feedback, which is a big one for you to develop as you go through your research career. You need to develop it as a normal part of the work you do. And I just think preprints are a great way of doing it. And the opportunity is there for you also to go on those servers, read these papers, see where research is in your area, and maybe you offer some feedback. You know, get involved with the community. So I'm all for them. I think they're a good open science way of engaging with research.
Thanks very much, Sinead. And there's no questions there in the chat, so we look to close there. But I suppose this is a nice webinar to close this series on, because you can just see, even in Sinead's kind of draft document there, how I suppose different components of what has been covered in the various webinars previous, in terms of, if I walk backwards in the timeline, in terms of credit, how does credit feed into the one section in the document that Sinead shared. Stepping back at one previous to that, good authorship practice. You can see the authorship criteria was first and foremost in the document that Sinead shared. And then the idea of predatory journals, which obviously feeds into that kind of journal selection that you're going to be looking at later on in the document. So you can just see how each one of those webinars basically feed in and complement what we're trying to achieve here. But look, on that, Sinead, thanks very much for the time, for being here with us today, the time for putting together the slides, and basically for sharing your knowledge in this area. Thanks very much, Sinead.
Thanks very much.
No problem at all. And everyone else, thank you for joining, and welcome feedback as always. So you can comment below or drop us an email, and we can get back to you as soon as possible. All the best, everyone. Thank you.